Everyone believes men and women experience silence in exactly the same way. They don't. When both of you suddenly stop talking, stop texting, and stop reaching out completely, something very different is happening inside his mind compared to what's happening inside yours. The person who truly understands this difference usually comes out stronger. Not because they are playing mind games, but because they know how to protect their own peace while the other person is still trying to understand what really happened. Silence is not experienced equally. It never has been. Pretending that it is can leave you trapped, waiting, hoping for a message that may never appear. Have you ever found yourself staring at your phone, wanting so badly to type just one sentence, just one small message, only to break the uncomfortable silence sitting between you? You keep telling yourself that you are strong enough to stay quiet, that you will wait and see what happens next. But somehow every hour feels like several days. Every notification makes your heart race for a second before you realize it is only another random app asking for your attention. You check whether he opened your last message. You check when he was last online. You tell yourself you are finished with this, yet somehow you keep looking again. Stay with me, because what happens next surprises almost everyone. The silence itself is telling a story, but not the one most people believe. You're not even together anymore, yet somehow the silence feels louder than any argument you ever had. This is where so many people end up living, caught inside that strange space where you're no longer together, yet you don't completely feel apart either. Both of you are simply drifting through the quiet. It starts feeling like whoever sends the first message loses. Like the first person to break the silence is automatically the one who cared more, wanted more, or couldn't handle the distance. But that belief often creates even more confusion. Here's what is really happening. While you're sitting there replaying every conversation, searching for hidden meanings, creating endless stories about what his silence must mean, he is usually going through something completely different. Not better, not worse, just different. Understanding that difference is what helps you stop exhausting yourself with endless overthinking. Most people never learn this, and because of that, they keep repeating the same painful cycle again and again. Before we continue, ask yourself one honest question. Have you been trying to understand the silence through your own emotions instead of trying to understand how the other person actually experiences it? That single shift changes everything. When communication suddenly disappears between a man and a woman, it often becomes two completely different experiences. She usually feels the emotional weight immediately, almost as if something important has been taken away overnight. He often notices it much later, after enough time passes for the absence to become real. She wonders if she ever truly mattered. He begins asking himself if he accidentally let something valuable slip through his hands. She looks for answers, explanations, and emotional closure. He often looks for space, distance, and time to sort out his own thoughts without feeling pressured. Same silence, same situation, yet two completely different stories are playing inside two different minds. If you don't understand this, you'll continue making decisions based on what you believe you would feel instead of what may actually be happening on the other side. That misunderstanding creates unnecessary pain. It leads to messages sent too early, expectations that never get met, and disappointment that could have been avoided. Keep listening, because one small misunderstanding during silence can completely change the direction of a relationship without either person realizing it. For many women, the silence feels overwhelming almost immediately. The moment the messages stop, the mind begins searching for reasons. Every conversation gets replayed, every sentence is examined, every tiny detail suddenly seems important. Did I say too much? Was I too distant? Did I seem too interested? Did he lose feelings? Did someone else come into his life? Is he actually busy? Or is this simply his quiet way of saying goodbye? The questions don't seem to stop. They keep circling through your thoughts, looking for answers that rarely come. That's because communication often represents emotional security. When he's talking to you, checking in, sending messages, or making small efforts to stay connected, it creates a feeling of closeness. It feels stable. It feels safe. So when that connection suddenly disappears, it doesn't simply feel like a pause. It feels personal. It feels like something meaningful has been taken away. The silence begins creating meanings that may not even be true, but they still feel real inside your heart. And once those stories begin, they become very difficult to silence. The hardest part is that the silence slowly starts speaking for him, even though he hasn't actually said anything. Your mind fills in every blank space. It convinces you that the silence means rejection. It whispers that maybe you weren't enough. Maybe he has already moved on while you're still holding on to memories that only matter to you now. Those thoughts feel convincing because the human mind hates uncertainty. It would rather create painful answers than accept not knowing. But that doesn't mean those answers are true. Many people never realize how much damage their own imagination can do during periods of silence. They respond to stories instead of facts. They react to fear instead of reality. That's why so many connections fall apart before either person truly understands what was happening. If you've ever caught yourself building an entire future around one unanswered message, you're far from alone. But what you're about to hear may completely change how you interpret those quiet moments from now on. Here's what many women don't fully realize during those first days or even weeks without communication. He's often not experiencing the silence in the same emotional way. That doesn't automatically mean he never cared. It doesn't always mean he's cold or emotionally unavailable. It simply means many men process emotional distance differently. When communication stops, a man is often focused on whatever is directly in front of him. Work, responsibilities, daily routines, personal distractions. He may not immediately sit down wondering what the silence means. Instead, the emotional impact often arrives later, after enough time has passed for the absence to become impossible to ignore. That's when certain memories begin showing up unexpectedly. A place reminds him of you. A song suddenly feels different. A routine no longer feels complete. The realization grows slowly instead of all at once. That delayed emotional response is something many people completely misunderstand. They assume no immediate reaction means no feelings existed. But human emotions don't always follow the same timeline. And if you judge someone else's silence only through your own emotional experience, you'll often misunderstand what is really happening behind the scenes. The next stage of this process is where everything becomes even more unexpected. At the beginning, he's usually not spending hours overthinking the silence. He's not trying to decode every missing message or searching for hidden meanings behind every quiet moment. Most of the time, he's simply living his daily life. He's staying busy. He's working. He's spending time with friends. He's going to the gym. He's handling responsibilities. He may even feel a little lighter because there is no pressure to reply, no expectation to keep every conversation going. For many men, space feels natural. They often prefer stepping back before sorting through emotions. Instead of talking through every feeling as it happens, they usually want time to clear their mind and understand things privately. So when the silence first begins, he may honestly feel comfortable with it. That doesn't automatically mean he stopped caring. It simply means silence doesn't carry the same emotional weight for him in those early days. He's rarely sitting there asking himself whether you're angry or whether you've already forgotten him. His attention stays on whatever is directly in front of him: work, family, friends, daily routines, small goals. He's filling the empty space with other parts of life, and for a while that seems to work perfectly well. Stay with me, because this early stage often fools people into believing the whole story has already been written. It hasn't. In fact, this is only where the real emotional timeline begins. This creates one of the biggest differences between men and women during periods of silence. She often experiences the silence as immediate emotional pain. He often experiences it as temporary relief from emotional pressure. Because of that, the first couple of weeks can look completely different for each person. She's questioning everything. She's replaying conversations in her mind. She may cry. She may wonder if the relationship meant anything at all. Meanwhile, he appears calm, almost unaffected on the outside. He's moving through his normal routine without constantly thinking about the silence. From her perspective, it can look like he never cared. From his perspective, nothing feels urgent yet. But here's where the situation slowly changes. That feeling of relief doesn't stay forever. Space feels comfortable at first, but eventually, even comfort starts revealing what is missing. He just doesn't recognize it immediately. The absence doesn't hit all at once. It arrives quietly, almost unnoticed. That's why judging someone's feelings during the first few days can be incredibly misleading. Keep watching, because what happens next explains why so many people become confused weeks after the silence begins. Most men don't wake up the morning after everything goes quiet thinking, "I miss her already." That's usually not how the process unfolds. Instead, it happens gradually. One ordinary day turns into another. A week passes, then another. Sometimes even a month goes by before certain moments begin breaking through his routine. He hears a song that instantly reminds him of you. He sees a funny video and almost sends it before remembering you're no longer talking. He has a difficult day and suddenly notices there's no familiar person waiting to hear about it anymore. He drives past a place you both visited. He remembers a joke only the two of you understood. None of these moments seem important by themselves, but together they begin stacking up. Slowly the silence changes shape. What once felt peaceful begins feeling strangely empty. What once felt like freedom begins feeling like absence. That's the turning point many people never see, because it happens quietly inside someone's private world. There are no dramatic speeches, no obvious signs, just a growing awareness that someone who used to be part of everyday life is no longer there. Here's where the timing becomes incredibly important. By the time he's finally beginning to feel that growing sense of loss, you've probably already walked through the hardest part of the emotional storm. You've already cried. You've already questioned yourself 100 different ways. You've already replayed every memory until there was almost nothing left to analyze. You sat with the pain while it was fresh. You carried it through sleepless nights, and little by little you started healing. So when he begins realizing what the silence actually means, you're no longer standing in the same emotional place. You're slowly rebuilding yourself. You're remembering who you were before this relationship consumed your thoughts. Your days are becoming fuller. Your attention is returning to your own life. You aren't staring at your phone every few minutes anymore. You're no longer searching every conversation for hidden mistakes. That emotional distance you've created wasn't planned as a strategy. It happened because you survived what once felt impossible. And whether he realizes it or not, that change creates a completely different energy between both of you. As your focus slowly shifts back toward your own life, something else quietly begins happening on his side. Many men don't fully understand the value of someone's presence until that presence is no longer guaranteed. While your attention was always available, while your replies came easily, while your care felt consistent, it became familiar. Familiar things are often appreciated the least because they seem permanent. He knew you were there. He believed that if he wanted to talk, you would probably answer. There wasn't much uncertainty. There wasn't much mystery. But now the situation feels different. The messages have stopped. Your attention is no longer waiting for him. Your energy isn't surrounding his everyday life anymore. That's when unexpected questions begin appearing. Is she doing okay? Is she still thinking about me? Has she already moved on? Did someone else enter her life? Those questions don't always arrive because of jealousy. Sometimes they appear simply because certainty has disappeared. Human beings naturally notice the value of something once it is no longer sitting within easy reach. The silence creates room for thoughts that never had space before. This is the part very few people talk about openly. When neither person reaches out, the silence eventually forces both individuals to face themselves instead of each other. For you, that probably meant facing your emotions directly, your fears, your unanswered questions, your disappointment, your hope. You had no choice but to sit with every uncomfortable feeling until it slowly became easier to carry. That emotional work changes people in ways they don't immediately notice. It builds strength where panic once lived. It replaces constant waiting with quiet acceptance. Meanwhile, his journey often begins later. Once distractions lose their power, once routines no longer fill every empty space, he finally has to face his own thoughts without anything covering them up. That's when the silence starts asking him difficult questions too. And sometimes those questions arrive long after everyone else assumed the story was already over. If you've made it this far, remember this one truth: silence doesn't always reveal who cared less. Very often, it simply reveals that people process loss on completely different timelines, and understanding that difference can change the way you see every quiet moment from now on. For him, the emotional journey is often only beginning. What once felt like simple space slowly turns into something much heavier. It becomes absence. And absence has a strange way of changing how people think. It creates curiosity. It brings old memories back to the surface. It makes someone wonder whether walking away was really the right decision. The things that once felt ordinary suddenly begin to matter because they are no longer part of everyday life. But this is also the moment where you need to be careful. When he finally starts thinking about you again, your first reaction may be to rush back the second he reaches out. You may want to answer immediately, show him you still care, prove that you've been waiting, and let him know the door is still wide open. That feels natural, especially if you've missed him for a long time, but moving too quickly can quietly restart the same pattern that created the distance in the first place. Before you even realize it, everything slips back into familiar routines. The silence taught you something valuable. Don't lose that lesson the moment things begin to change. Stay with me, because this next part explains why so many people unknowingly repeat the same relationship cycle again and again. Imagine the relationship like a habit that slowly formed over time. Every time you were the first person to send a message, every time you carried the conversation, every time you made sure the connection never faded, you unintentionally showed him that your attention would always be there. He never had to question it. He never had to wonder if you would disappear. Your care became something predictable, and human nature often works in surprising ways. When something feels guaranteed, people can slowly stop recognizing its true value. This doesn't automatically make someone selfish or uncaring. It's simply how familiarity affects many people. Think about the things we often overlook until they are suddenly gone. We usually notice their importance only after their absence becomes real. That's why pulling back changes more than just the amount of communication. It changes the emotional pattern itself. You're no longer filling every empty space. You're no longer waiting quietly in the background hoping he'll notice you. Suddenly there is uncertainty where certainty once existed, and uncertainty naturally creates attention. It makes someone stop and think instead of simply assuming everything will always stay the same. Now, instead of automatically believing you'll always be there, he may begin asking himself questions that never crossed his mind before. Is she still interested? Has she moved on? Is someone else making her smile now? Did I wait too long? Those thoughts don't appear because he's suddenly playing games. They appear because something that once felt secure no longer feels guaranteed. For the first time, there is something meaningful at risk. He has to honestly decide whether losing the relationship is something he can accept. That's where silence quietly changes the situation. Its greatest strength isn't simply making someone miss you. Its greatest strength is giving you enough distance to rebuild yourself. While the outside world sees only silence, something important is happening inside you. Your confidence slowly returns. Your identity becomes stronger. Your peace no longer depends on constant messages or daily reassurance. Keep watching, because this shift is where everything starts moving in a completely different direction. The change isn't only happening inside him, the biggest transformation is happening inside you. As more time passes, your life gradually becomes fuller again. You begin enjoying moments that have nothing to do with him. You laugh without thinking about whether he'll text. You make plans without checking your phone every few minutes. You start remembering that your happiness existed long before this relationship entered your life. That's when your energy naturally changes, and people often notice that change even if they can't explain why. It isn't about pretending not to care. It isn't about acting distant just to create mystery. It's about genuinely reaching a place where your emotional balance no longer depends on another person's choices. That kind of confidence cannot be faked for very long. It shows in your conversations. It shows in your decisions. It even shows in your silence. When someone senses that you are no longer sitting around waiting for their attention, they often become curious about what changed. Not because you're playing hard to get, but because you're finally living your own life again instead of placing it on hold. On his side, the next stage often begins quietly. He may not suddenly pour out his heart or apologize for everything. Instead, he usually starts with something small. Maybe he likes one of your social media posts after weeks of silence. Maybe he sends a simple "hey" without much depth behind it. Maybe he finds an excuse to check in that feels casual rather than emotional. At this point, he isn't necessarily ready for a serious conversation. Often he's just testing the situation. He wants to know whether you're still there, whether you still care, whether the connection can still be reopened whenever he chooses. This is where many people accidentally give away everything too quickly. They see one small sign of attention and immediately believe it means everything has changed. They respond with excitement, relief, and the same availability they showed before. Without realizing it, they answer every question he was wondering about. Yes, you're still waiting. Yes, you're still emotionally available. Yes, nothing has really changed. And because of that, he never feels the need to approach the situation differently. But when your response comes from a calmer place, everything feels different. You don't ignore him to punish him. You don't chase him to ease your own anxiety either. You simply answer from a place of emotional balance. Sometimes that means taking your time. Sometimes that means keeping the conversation natural without revealing every feeling immediately. The important part isn't creating mystery on purpose. It's allowing him to experience uncertainty naturally. Wondering whether you've changed keeps his mind engaged. Wondering whether you're truly moving forward encourages him to reflect on what he really wants. That reflection cannot happen if every answer arrives instantly. This is where the silence begins working in your favor. You're no longer chasing. You're no longer watching every online status or searching every social media update for hidden clues. You're living your own life, and that quiet confidence often becomes more powerful than endless words ever could. If you've stayed with me this far, remember this, because the final lesson changes everything. The hardest truth is also the most freeing one. Not every man will come back. Some relationships truly end, and no amount of silence will rewrite that reality. But that doesn't mean the silence failed. The purpose was never to force someone into chasing you. The real purpose was helping you remember your own worth without depending on someone else's attention. You don't need daily messages to feel valuable. You don't need constant reassurance to believe you matter. You don't need another person's approval to feel complete. Real peace comes from knowing your happiness isn't controlled by someone else's decisions. Once you reach that place, everything changes. If he reaches out, you can calmly decide whether reconnecting is actually right for you. If he never reaches out, your life continues moving forward with confidence instead of fear. That's the true shift in power. You stop needing one specific outcome before allowing yourself to be happy. And when that happens, no one else controls your emotional world anymore. That is the lesson many people spend years trying to learn. But once you truly understand it, silence no longer feels like punishment. It simply becomes another chapter that helped you become stronger. Many people never move beyond the waiting. They stay trapped in hope, constantly checking for signs, quietly depending on another person's attention to feel valuable. Day after day, they wait for one message, one call, one tiny signal that tells them they still matter. But when you've truly grown through the silence, something changes inside you. You stop measuring your worth by someone else's actions. That is the real difference between someone who understands silence and someone who is still frightened by it. Now let's look at what happens if he finally reaches out, because this is where emotions can become confusing very quickly. After weeks, or maybe even months, your phone lights up with his name. It could be an apology. It could be a casual hey. Maybe he talks as if nothing ever happened. Suddenly you're standing at a crossroads. Should you reply? Should you ignore it? Should you give him another chance? These questions don't have simple answers. Stay with me, because the next few minutes may completely change how you look at that message when it finally arrives. One decision made from emotion can restart an old cycle, while one decision made from confidence can protect everything you've worked so hard to rebuild. The first thing you need to remember is that a message by itself doesn't automatically mean anything. What matters is the reason behind it, and even more importantly, what follows after it. Someone can reach out because they're lonely. They can text because they're bored on a quiet evening. They can reconnect simply because curiosity showed up for a moment. None of those reasons automatically point toward lasting change. On the other hand, someone may reach out because they honestly reflected on what happened, accepted their part in it, and genuinely want to build something healthier. Those are two completely different situations. The difficult part is that you cannot tell the difference from one text alone. Words can sound convincing, emotions can feel powerful, but real change reveals itself through consistent actions over time. That's why patience becomes your greatest strength here. Don't rush to create a new future from one conversation. Let time reveal the truth. Time has a way of exposing intentions much more clearly than excitement ever can. And that is exactly why emotional growth matters before reconciliation ever begins. This is where many women accidentally lose the progress they worked so hard to build. The moment his message appears, their heart starts racing. Finally, there is some kind of answer. Finally, proof that they weren't imagining the connection. Finally, a sign that maybe all the waiting meant something after all. Those feelings are completely understandable. But one message cannot erase weeks or months of silence. It cannot automatically undo old habits, rebuild trust, or guarantee that anything has truly changed. It only tells you one simple fact. At that particular moment, you crossed his mind. That's all. And people think about many things throughout the day. Thoughts come and go. Curiosity comes and goes. Missing someone for a moment is not the same as being ready to build a healthier relationship. That's why it's so important to step back instead of rushing forward. Keep watching, because this next shift is where your healing begins, protecting you instead of your emotions controlling you. The difference is subtle, but it changes everything. The work you did during the silence finally begins paying off here. You're no longer desperate for small pieces of attention. You're no longer willing to accept tiny efforts simply because they temporarily fill an emotional gap. You spent this time rebuilding your confidence, reconnecting with yourself, and remembering what kind of relationship you truly deserve. Because of that, you can now recognize low effort without confusing it for love.